letting kids like express themselves, but also just be open to changing it. And I think also maybe teaching them the confidence, because I think it took me a while to learn this as a writer too, that like the next idea will come. Maybe your one idea wasn't like the idea, but like have the confidence that if you had the imagination and the excitement about this one idea, the next one will come, or you'll work at it and you'll find something even better. So like your darling of a scene that we wrote that we're just like so in love with that we absolutely can't do, we will find the better version of it. Or, I mean, maybe it won't be as brilliant as the one we had, but it'll be 95% of brilliant, just knowing that your brain generated the one thing, like it'll generate more.
This is Arts Educators Save the World, where successful artists and their mentors talk about how arts education transformed their lives. Hey. Welcome back to Arts Educators Save the World, a podcast where artists and their mentors talk about the impact that arts education has had on both their lives. And we are back with another episode of Powerhouse Women. They are writers. They are producers. They are TV showrunners. And they are, nope, I'm not going to give it to you. I'm going to save it for the episode to hear how these two women are co-mentoring their way into television brilliance. Enjoy. This is a special day on Arts Educators Save the World because I am talking with a pair of people who are simultaneously artists and mentors to one another. Lila and Nora Zuckerman, note the same last name, they are sisters, are a dynamic creative team who have come up in television as co-writers, producers, and now television showrunners. It's difficult for me to introduce one without the other. Artistically, they've been partners since they first wrote for TV shows, including Fox shows Fringe and Human Target, as well as the sci-fi series Haven. They quickly moved into the multi-hyphenate role of writer-producers for a few little shows you may have heard of, Suits and Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. They were then executive producers for Prodigal Son. They recently moved into the big chairs, serving as showrunners for their first season of Poker Face, a favorite of mine, and they are now putting their heads together on the reboot of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. While I've already talked with folks before who are peer mentors, you may have heard episodes with visual artist Faisal Abduallah and his partner, actor Fraser James. And I've also talked with family members, Top Chef contestant Valentine Howell Jr. and his mentor, his mom. And I've explored mentorship among female power duos like Tony Award winner Shayna Taub and Pulitzer Prize winner Janine Tesori. But I have never before had all of this energy wrapped up into one amazing dynamic duo. Lila and Nora, I can't wait to hear about your journey together through writing, producing, and how you've taught one another. Welcome to Arts Educators Save the World.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the introduction.
I'm really excited to get this conversation going. And typically what I ask, which I'm excited to hear the answer to in this case, is what is the first time you remember working together? And I would love to know artistically, and even if it is like the first time you remember working together as kiddos, I think that's a really interesting way into talking about your partnership.
Wow. I mean, my earliest memory is actually telling a story to Nora when I was 3 years old, and I think she was 1.5 years old. And we were sitting on the floor listening to one of those Disney records where they chime and you turn the page. I didn't even think I obviously didn't know how to read then, but I knew where the chimes were. And we were listening to a story together. But growing up, I always felt like Nora knew that she wanted to be a writer. I was intimidated by the notion of writing when I was a teenager. And I always remember reading what Nora would write. She would write these short stories. She would write these little miniature film noir movies, and just being so impressed by her talent and thinking, oh my God, I could never do this.
It's so funny. Yeah, I was trying to think back, but yeah, you went way back. Yeah, it's funny. Lilla and I think this is partially why we work well together, is Lilla always sort of gravitated more towards performance, and I always sort of gravitated more towards behind the scenes storytelling, and of course television is a little bit of both, right? And what we do is sort of both. All those skills sort of need to meld, which is I think why we make a great team. But yeah, I almost don't remember a time where we weren't collaborating, even if it wasn't creative, it was scheming, or, we come from a big family, but Lilla and I are the oldest two of 5 kids. So, of course, there was always something afoot between the two of us, and we're always like partners in crime. So I think that when we did actually start, collaborating professionally, it just felt pretty natural, I think, because we just have that shared history and that shared sort of partners in crime attitude through everything.
I think the story that sums it up about us growing up, Nora, is I'm a year and a half older than Nora, and I got my learner's permit, not even my driver's license. And the first thing that I did was drive Nora, who was too young to be in a car with somebody that didn't have their driver's license, to the mall. And we had scraped together all of our babysitting money or something, and we bought a secret television, like one of those tiny little televisions that have the long tube in the back. And we hid it under Nora's bed. And after everybody went to bed, I'd sneak into Nora's room and we would watch Twin Peaks, because at that point we had all these younger siblings and we were not allowed to watch Twin Peaks in front of the little kids. And so that about sums up
it had,
our
like,
relationship.
the bunny ears. It was like, it was crazy. And then, I loved that television because our family, again, 5 kids, but our parents believed in like one television for the whole family, which is kind of like today's equivalent of like not giving your kid a phone. Like, that's cruel and unusual punishment. So we had bought this like illegal television that we kept. And then Lilla and I went to different high schools. I went to boarding school for high school, and Lilla went to the public school in our town. And at some point I packed up that television and took it with me to boarding school. So I had like the illicit television in my dorm room, which of course we were absolutely not allowed to have back then. And it made me a lot of friends, actually, back then. So,
did your parents ever find out about the illicit TV, or are they finding out right now listening to Arts Educators Save the World?
They're probably finding out right now, which, if you're going to have a kid that acts out in any sort of rebellion, I hope it's as nerdy as
that.
Driving your sisters to get a TV so you can watch David Lynch,
Yeah. And definitely a sign of things to come.
But yeah, it came in very useful. Yeah, totally. Yeah. But I do remember like I had one of those big hard-sided trunks that I would send to school every year. And I like took clothes out so I could fit the TV into it. And like, I was like praying it made it through the journey by the time I, got to boarding school. But it worked. Thank God.
So early influences, Disney storybooks, David Lynch and secret television. Clearly, we are off to an amazing start. Nora, you mentioned that you always wanted to be a writer. So can you talk about what your education was as a writer and how that kind of got you to the place where you moved into professional television writing?
Well, I think, I was like a voracious reader, when I was a kid, and my mom would just drop us off at like the local library. And, again, like we're the oldest two of 5, she had a lot to deal with. So it was kind of my thing. I would like find one author that I would love and just like tear through, whatever series they had that I was obsessed with, and it was usually pretty dark kids fare, it was like YA before they knew what to call it. But I really loved, like especially sort of genre stuff and weird sci-fi. And I would just like find these like weird niche authors. And yeah, the darker the better usually for me. And then I think probably at too young of an age, I transitioned to like Stephen King and, the stuff that I probably shouldn't have been reading at the time as well. And so I think, the want to become a writer was more like, I'm going to write stuff like this, I'm going to write books. And then I really fell in love with film and television, and it, it occurred to me that, wow, like I can apply my need to write and story tell to this like totally different medium. And I also had like a real love. I was not a good musician, but I loved music. Like at boarding school, I was like the music director of our, radio station and stuff. And so I think like film and television sort of combines all those things. It's like music, it's storytelling, it's visual arts, which I was also really into. And so, but it also probably began with, my mom just like leaving us at a library unattended, as we did back then.
As you were children of the 80s.
Yeah.
And what were we doing between the hours of 3 and 9? I mean, I guess we'll never know.
Yeah. Exactly.
So true.
Try it sometime, kid.
That's right. So Lilla, how did you enter the chat? I mean, you were studying theater, right? And you were training to be a performer.
That's right. And, I loved being a part of productions. In retrospect now, I don't think I was that good of an actor, but I had a lot of respect for that craft. And I think that what I learned with my theater degree was that I just love being a part of a big, impossible production. I like a big project. I'll build the IKEA furniture. I'll build the swing set for the yard, and I will showrun a television show. That was really the takeaway from my education in the arts, is like, I did like to collaborate. I did like to tackle what seemed like an impossible thing. Let's put on a show. And I liked the people. So once I got out of college, I was like, oh gosh, I guess I'm going to be an actor now, but I don't really enjoy it and I'm not very good at it, but I love the world. And the first thing that we collaborated on, Nora and I, was actually a book. I had an idea for a book, and I frankly didn't think I knew how to write or how I was going to write it. So I just went to Nora and I was like, hey, we're going to do this thing together. And she thought I was absolutely crazy. She's like, she was out there trying to sell really great spec screenplays. And she's like, it's even harder to write a book. Are you crazy to get a book published? And we ended up being great collaborators on this book. And I was like, don't worry, I'll figure it out. I'm going to get this thing published. And sure enough, it worked. And that opened the door for us beginning, starting to think, what else can we do together? What's the next step? Maybe we could make this a TV show. Should we try to write a movie? Should we try to work together? And then we were off to the races.
Yeah, I think Lilla's sort of naive enthusiasm was kind of good for me at that moment too, because I was at a stage of my career where, I was just starting out, but I was going to a ton of meetings, and compared to my peers who are in film school, they were like, you have reps, you're getting out there. But like, I would go up for a job and they'd be like, oh, we gave it to, this award-winning writer. Like I was just never going to get the work. And I needed somebody who was just like, no, let's just do this thing, and I was kind of full of cynicism. And, going back to sort of your theme of mentoring and stuff, sometimes that's the best kind of mentor to have. I think of it a lot like, the movie Thelma and Louise, they're friends. And like when one is down, the other is up. When one is stuck, the other is helping them through it and stuff. And hopefully you're not both down at the same moment, although that's happened too, always having somebody that has that optimism, even if you don't, is hugely helpful, especially in our business,
How does collaborating as an artistic process work? So whether it's with your book or with, an episode of a television show, are you working together? Are you working independently and then sharing what you've done and giving one another notes? Like, what does your artistic collaboration look like?
That's a great question because it took us a while to figure out the answer to that as well. How we can collaborate with each other as writers, because as we discovered, we both have, especially very early on in the process, really different techniques in terms of like what gets our brain going and what's going to like spur inspiration. And I'm the type of writer where I might not know what I'm going to write, but if I sit down and start typing and just putting things to paper, the ideas will flow. I think it's a technique called think do. And I'm like, that really works for me. And so I'll spend a couple days just typing. And Nora is the opposite. Nora is a think.
Yeah.
I don't know. There might not be an official term for it.
Think, marinate, think some more, But.
So in the days where we would like either be sharing an office or sharing a space, I'm on the computer tapping away and Nora is looking out the window. And I'm like, what are you doing?
Yeah. But I'm like,
What
I
is
figured out the
happening?
third act, but it's, and I would be like, what is she typing? Like, we don't even know what we're doing. Like, why is she writing an email about something else? Like, she better not be writing this because we don't know what it is yet. But I'm a much more, and it took me a while to sort of figure this out too. Like I really marinate and I go through various scenarios in my head, before I write stuff down. And, I think it helps me because by the time I have written it down, I kind of like, I think I have the best version, at least in my head at the moment, I don't have to spend 5 pages getting to the better version. But I think, it can be frustrating from somebody who doesn't live inside my head. So I'm always sympathetic to Lilla, but hopefully it usually works out okay.
It works out. And like once we understood that about each other and trusted that that was part of the process, and she wasn't just, shopping for tile for her bathroom remodel. She was thinking about the project,
Yeah.
I was like, oh, actually, yeah, because then she would come to me 3 days later and be like, so here's this brilliant thing that I've been thinking of. And then once we get to like the nitty gritty of having to turn out these scripts or break these stories, the good thing about working in television and some film projects now too, is that they move very quickly. You have to be collaborative. You have to be agile. You have to be pragmatic about the choices you're making. You can still have moments for discovery, but you're usually kind of sprinting to the finish line. And then you're going to sprint to another finish line and sprint to another finish line. And at first, I was very insecure to take an act of a TV show and write it without Nora sitting next to me. But it was just necessary for us to start divvying this stuff up and being like, all right, I think I know this action sequence. I'll write this. And I think you understand this poignant ending. So you write that. And then we would switch off and go back and forth. So by the time everything gets put together, it truly does belong to us. But having that time limitation and hanging over your head actually made us kind of agile in terms of like, I'll take this, you take that. We'll talk to each other in 2 hours.
Yeah. And we always tend to switch off, and we're rewriting each other, and neither one of us, gets too precious. Obviously we'll go back and I'll be like, oh, you cut my favorite line, and, whatever. We'll fight about that kind of stuff. But like, usually we're pretty comfortable, giving ourselves over to each other. But yeah, TV is a very specific process in particular, because usually by the time you get your, assignment of like, okay, you're writing this Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. episode, it shoots in 4 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe, depending on like how organized the room has been. Sometimes things move quickly. Sometimes one script can slow down the whole room and all of a sudden you have to catch up. So when you thought you might have a week to write an outline, you have 2 days, and it really forces you to sort of split things up and be nimble. And I think that's also partially why Lilla and I have been successful and been hired, because we have a reputation for being fast, because there's 2 of us. But, again, my process is the sort of slow soak and marinate version, but like television forces me out of that sometimes too, because it's like, we don't have time to marinate, get in the room and come up with a 3rd act or 4th act, because like we're stuck. And then it kind of, it forces you out of your comfort zone sometimes. But that's healthy, I think, as well. So
does it create what do I want to ask? I'm thinking about the power dynamics that are often generated between collaborators when people have different approaches and maybe are coming in with different areas of expertise. And I'm wondering, like, is it because you're sisters that can be sort of you can forego that in favor of like, look, it's just about the process, it's just about the work? Or do you think you've worked at that together to say, like, how do we balance these power dynamics in addition to, it's quote unquote just about the work?
That's such a great question. I think that there are all sorts of different kinds of partnerships, right? So it's really a question of partnerships. I know that there are showrunning partners where one is always in the room and the other one's always on set, or one is always on post and the other one's always behind their desk writing. We get asked a lot, so who's the script person or the character person? Who's the logic person? Who's the pitching person? And I think when we started out, I definitely felt more comfortable pitching than Nora did because of my theater training. And Nora definitely felt more comfortable on the page because she had been trained in screenwriting and I was more self-taught and taught by her. But at this point, what's interesting about the power dynamics is it's less about those skills, because we have the skills to be on set. We have the skills to be in post. We have the skills to run the room and write the scripts. And I'll be curious to hear what you think about this too, Nora. But I think it's like almost on some stories or some shows or some episodes, one person will just feel it in their bones. And I can always tell when Nora is onto something. And I'm like, go ahead, you're driving the bus now. Kind of take us to where you think we need to be. And that switches episode to episode. I think it switches show to show too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it can switch like within an episode too, where all of a sudden I'll be like, okay, I get this now. Or, Lilla will understand where we're going and can take over. I think it's funny. Yeah, we've had, it's usually like an executive, I feel like, who's always asking us, like, who's the one that blah, blah. And I'm like, you know what? We're a black box. You don't know. You don't know who does what. We love to be mysterious about this stuff. But anybody who's worked with us will tell us, some of us have sense of, like Lilla has, I think, a great sense of structure. And she can do the story math a lot quicker than I can. But then there's times where I'll come in with the save because I've figured out some elaborate thing in my head. And vice versa, Lilla can come in with the kooky creative idea that is usually sort of my domain. But I think, we both kind of fill in when needed. But yeah, I don't necessarily think of it so much as like a power dynamic. But sometimes it's kind of letting the other one run a little bit more and what's needed in the moment. And sometimes there's times on set where, I'm like, we kind of Rochambeau. We're like, are you going to give that note? Am I going to give it? And so it's like
Not it.
One of us may look like they're more in charge in the moment or not. But really we're both, nobody's going rogue and nobody's running roughshod over the other person. I think, you need all the help you can get in those situations. So we're always grateful to have the other one there. you know?
I will say, like, one thing that we've learned is that when we do have creative disputes, right? We do have disagreements. And Nora and I can talk at each other until the cows come home about my idea versus your idea. And what we've kind of settled on is like, well, let me show you instead of tell you. Let me show you this scene. Give me an hour. Let me try to figure out if this crazy action sequence or this mission or this plot twist works. Let me see if this caper works on the page. Or let me show you what this character's voice is.
Yeah, the voice of a character is something that's sometimes very singular. And in television, sometimes you're really lucky to come into a show where those voices are already very strong and you kind of learn to mimic them and you learn to understand them and you internalize them and stuff. But especially for original stuff, you know, like original pilots or new characters, it's really hard sometimes for two people to come up with that voice. So it becomes, you know, you're talking through it and you're saying they're the person that would say this kind of thing or they're this type, but you really don't know until you start writing the scene, you know? And so that's where the like, show me, don't tell me thing, I think helps a lot, you know, we've learned that, I think, over the years, like just let her run with it and we'll see, you know.
That really reminds me of there's an idea in learning theory that it's called constructionism, which is the idea that people learn by making things, right? So rather than learning by telling or learning by absorbing or learning by reflecting, people learn by actually creating the artifact that instantiates the concept or the idea. And furthermore, there's this idea that artifact, that thing, serves as sort of the distributed opportunity for people to connect around ideas so that like the knowledge is distributed between the people and the thing that they've made. And so when I think about how art making is a really great metaphor, isn't even the right word, a great model for how all learning should look, right? It makes me think like, wouldn't that be a delightful way for peers in a classroom to learn from one another, is to have to make the thing that you're trying to explain to your partner and use that as the opportunity for the two of you to, you know, argue, resolve, check in with one another, you know, be able to be respectful about each other's contributions. So I love that you've kind of highlighted this constructionist approach to writing and how that connects you with one another, like as intellectual collaborators.
It kind of describes like breaking television, right, Lil?
Yeah.
Like, you know,
I was about to say you just described a writer's room.
Yeah, it's so funny.
So say more about that. Tell me like what that means, breaking television and writer's room and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't know how television episodes are created. Like, I think Lil and I, we always get questions from like so-and-so's uncle at Thanksgiving, like, so which one of you writes which character? And you're like, well, that's not really how it works. But what we do as a group, and it really is like, I tell people too when I'm trying to like just be like, no, my job is kind of like being in a giant meeting all day long. Like it's so like if you hate being in a meeting, you'll hate being in a writer's room. But it's a group of people. We all have one goal, which is, let's say, to write an episode of, you know, this upcoming Buffy show. And we're all driving towards the same goal, but we all may have different skill sets. And there's usually one person who kind of whose episode it's going to be. Maybe it started as their idea, or you just know it's their kind of thing. And we all break the episode as a group, meaning we decide what the story is. We go from just the actual concept of the story, which we call blue sky, when any idea starts, and, you know, the story could go anywhere, down to the little granular elements of what is in this scene. You know, if this person is slaying a vampire, how are they doing it? What makes it different than any other version of it that we've seen? You know, so we go from this sort of very large, you know, sort of big blue sky storytelling to really granular in the course of what, Lil, 2.5 weeks, 2 weeks maybe for an episode. And it really is like a group exercise. So if you're the person in the room that hates talking and wants to go hide in a corner, then the job is not for you. You know, you have to share your ideas
just
and listen.
Throwing ideas up on the board at first that are a little unhinged, and then you start to see this pattern come together, and then somebody says, hey, wouldn't it be cool if halfway through this unexpected thing happens, and I have a great idea for how we can kill this bad guy, et cetera, et cetera. And you are doing exactly what you're talking about, Erica. You're constructing as a group this thing, this, you know,
story
grand idea.
Yeah. And it's funny, like people will have, you know, because now we have phones that take pictures of every single thing. Like writers will be like, let me show you this story break we did. I'll show it to you because every character's in a different color and and it's all, you know, and it becomes like this weird kind of secret language that we all understand and we all think is cool, because when it comes together and it's really fun, like there's nothing better. Like I think of, you know, when we were on Poker Face breaking the like dinner theater episode we did, it was so much fun to figure out all the machinations of that particular episode, because also the solve had to happen during a play. So we had to write basically like a fake play along with, you know, this actual mystery. And it was very madcap and it was very fun. And like, that's one of those episodes where you could, you know, I wish that was during COVID. So we didn't really, I guess we had kind of a board, but that's like one of those things where it's like, you'd love to look back at the picture of what that board looked like and go like, oh, it's like a stained glass window for us, you know, to stare at and be like, look how amazingly this is constructed.
I will super.
Yeah, it's like super nerdy. You know, it's like, but that's the kind of thing that we get excited about.
I've analyzed data that looks like that. So I've done research with young people who create art, and I have traced their artifacts from sort of initial idea in a journal to, you know, rough draft to final, and gone back and forth in time to try to understand how making is happening and how learning is happening, and what are the moments in that process where a young person says like, oh, you know, I wanted to do something about my heritage, and I was having a conversation with my dad about being, you know, half from Mexico and half from the US. And so I realized this flag that I wanted to put in my image should be this half Mexican, half American flag, right? So to be able to trace back those moments is like, from a learning perspective, is super duper satisfying. And yeah, really, really nerdy and fun.
I'll give you like one of my favorite examples of that is when we were doing Poker Face with Ryan Johnson. He came into the room in the first week and said, here's how I knew that this show is going to work. I'm going to show you guys something. It's the shape of the show. And he pulled out like a little moleskin notebook that's like this smaller than a cell phone. And he opened to a page, and there was literally just like one curved line that was like an arc with 3 little hashes on it. And he goes, this is our show. And everyone's like, okay. But he was right. It was in his mind, the shape of our show, where it starts off with this certain storytelling, and then you go back in time, so it restarts, and then it goes forward. And that was his artifact to that. So I thought that was so funny. And whenever we got stuck, we would just like draw weird stick figure rainbow thing.
Or like, let's try Ryan's rainbow, and figure out where all these pieces land and stuff. And, if you buy a screenwriting book, there's lots of, I feel like in one class, one of my early film classes I took, it was literally like a 9-pointed star or something, like everybody has a different version in their head of like what that structure is and how to explain it. But it's like, find the one that works for you, or steal somebody else's if you find it complicated and stuff. But it's funny, there is this need, I think, for a lot of writers to put some spatial like understanding of something that isn't that, which is probably a common teaching thing too, right?
It should be. If it isn't, it should be. I mean, I do think there is still an idea in formal education that kids have to be able to access information without an assist in order to be considered smart and good at stuff. And so the existence of persistent artifacts that help us access knowledge sometimes is like, that makes them less good at things. And sometimes educators are scared by that because they don't feel expert in the creation of whatever those artifacts are. And so it makes them nervous to have to rely on those kinds of things. And I find that all the time when I work with educators who want to engage in more arts practices. We will often get into conversations about like, what do you actually need to know about writing, for creative writing, for example, in order to be able to work with learners, with young people around creative writing.
It makes me think about the writer's room too. When Nora and I have had the freedom to kind of set our own tone as showrunners, we always buy a bunch of those crazy magnets that you build things out of, like, and we encourage people to bring not the magnet tiles, but like the tiny
balls.
ones,
the
like
little
the little
bucky
balls. The bucky balls. And we have snacks, and we have people bring in their notebooks, and we have people that know how to draw sometimes, and we let them doodle, and we let them kind of use that as a way to access. Some people want to stare at silence in the board. And if that is their episode and that helps them, everybody knows like, hey, let's just give it a minute and be quiet. I like to take notes and write things down, even if it's not because I think I'll forget it, but it actually helps cement stuff in my brain. And I can actually then be inspired in a different way, where somebody is like building the Death Star out of buckyballs, but that's actually kind of opening up their brain to kind of feel a little bit creative, or it's, getting any anxiety out, and then they're able to focus more on the task at hand. So as long as it's not like you completely ignoring the room on your cell phone, like Nora and I are like, yeah, come in with your colored pencils and whatever it is, as long as it helps you focus on the task at hand. Everybody's got their different ways of being an artist, and like where you need to put your hands and where you need to put your head. And like, I always have a blanket for some reason. I'm cold, but also I need to be cozy,
Yeah.
Like you just have to get weird a little bit as a group and trust each other when you're doing work like this.
Yeah. The best rooms we've been in have gotten very weird, but in a way that just basically means like we trust each other,
I talk a lot about the importance of what I call scaffolding risk-taking, which is the idea that in order to be able to learn anything new, you have to be willing to take a risk. And in order to take a risk in any sort of environment, the people in charge have to build some scaffolding around that, right? You've said a couple times, like, we like to get weird. Well, getting weird doesn't just happen, right? You have to create the circumstances for people to feel like they can take those risks. And I don't know if you've reflected on that, but, it just makes me curious, like, is that an explicit thing on your parts? Like, do you think about how to set the conditions for people to take those risks in your rooms? Or is it because you all have liked to get weird, and so you think like, well, what would I like to have happen? Like, how do you set those conditions for people to feel like they can take risks in your spaces?
That's an interesting way of putting it. But I think, you described also like the type of process Lil and I set up for breaking story. We think of it as like a series of safety nets, right? So when we start breaking story, we have this method that we learned on Agents of Shield, that we refer to as shortboard, longboard, or the longboard is sometimes referred to as brick by brick. So the shortboard is literally 5 columns on a whiteboard, with each scene in an act sort of, and basically like 2-3 sentences a scene, right, Lil? Like just sort of very basic structure, and then that gets approved. Everybody signs off on it. And then you go to what we call the longboard process. And that's when we really get, like I was saying, like very granular. Like, okay, what does this sequence look like? You said, a monster is coming after this main character. Like, what are we actually seeing? Like, are we seeing teeth? Are we seeing glowing eyes? Is this makeup? Is this special effects? Is this what, like, we really get like very specific, and sometimes we shrink the room for that. Sometimes like other people will move on to a blue sky because if you get that granular, sometimes the bigger room is less productive at it. You need just like 2 or 3 other people in the room with you. And we literally, in what was 2-3 sentences becomes like a massive paragraph, and we are pitching dialogue and we're pitching detail. But once that board is done, the long board, like that gets approved. And then the writer goes off and writes the outline, and the outline is a fleshed out version of that long board. And then that outline, of course, gets approved by us, but also by our studio and our network, and they've all bought into the concept of the episode at this point. And then somebody goes off and writes the script. So it's really like a series, as you're talking about scaffolding. It's like we think of it as safety nets, where like the writer knows where they're going. Hopefully we haven't left them in a lurch. Hopefully we haven't left a big giant plot hole, although there's always stuff like that comes up. And they can feel safe enough to like have the fun risks, or come to us and say like, oh my God, I've got some crazy idea for this that we didn't talk about, but can I put it in? And that's been, I think, for us, like a very productive way of doing this. And it keeps things fun, but safe.
And I do think, Nora, that's like one side of the coin. But the other side of the coin is like the culture of your room or your workplace or your classroom or whatever you're talking about. And I do think people really take cues from the showrunners or the teachers or whatever. When you have your first initial days or you're starting a new episode and people are doing their blue sky pitches, they're looking at you of how to react if something doesn't work. If a risk was taken and it falls flat, if you have a showrunner that's like humiliates you or scoffs or makes fun of you, then the room picks up cues. Okay, that's how we behave. That's the culture of our show, right? But if you have a showrunner or a teacher or whoever is, leading the charge in the room, that's like, I'm going to have to think about that. But cool. Thank you. That was surprising. Interesting. What else we got? And then everyone's like, oh, that was respectful. That was kind. It doesn't mean that an idea is dead. It doesn't mean that this person is a terrible writer. Maybe it didn't land the way they wanted to land, but we can always revisit it. And so much of our job is like setting a culture, whether it's in the room or on set, in terms of like how we are going to work and what is going to be acceptable and unacceptable behavior, and make sure people do feel not just safe coming to work, but like happy, like looking forward to it, because that's where you're going to get people's great work. And I can't tell you how many times one of the best pitches I've ever heard starts out like, okay, so this is really stupid and it makes no sense, but, and if you haven't created a space where people feel comfortable, and like Nora and I are very friendly, we're open, sometimes we have wine Fridays after the room is wrapped. So I really want the room to bond with each other and trust each other. So somebody can come up with like, okay, this is really stupid and it doesn't work. And it's the greatest thing you've ever heard.
Right. Or it spurs the right idea.
That's right.
I think the thing with any sort of group exercise like being in a writer's room is like Lilla said, somebody could pitch something and it's not right for that moment, but you understand why they pitched it and you understand what problem they're trying to solve, right? And maybe it's not the right solution or the coolest thing that you've heard, but you're definitely like understanding that they're running at the problem. And like being understanding and accepting of that. And it can be really stressful sometimes, especially if you're in a new room and you're learning the culture, to sort of say like, what can I say? And what can't I say? And, we've had all kinds of experience, in our career, good and bad. We've had the bad boss that like, I just think of one comment I made that Lil and I always joke about where I pitched something and the showrunner said, "Are you trying to ruin my show?" And I was like, "No, that was not what I was trying to do."
Say
but
yes,
it's like,
actually, that's exactly what I was trying to do.
Yeah, I'm actually trying
to
to ruin your successful television show. And I think like when, he would laugh about it if I brought it up now, but at the time I think he took that very seriously, But you also, as a writer in this business, and knowing that writers' rooms are sort of can sometimes be rough at places, like you kind of have to just like laugh it off and let it roll off your back, and then just not be afraid to pitch the next idea too. Like you kind of have to, sometimes bury it and just sort of move on, because that's your job as well. So. It's much more fun to be the person on the other side, making, judgments. But, I think the recovery and the bounce back to an idea badly received is just as important, because you can't stew all day. You can't go, "Oh, man, I really solved that one. They didn't see it." And then Lilla can be like, "Just drop it, Nora." I'm like, "You're right. You gotta move on."
I want to come back to your transition from writers to producers and to showrunners. But before I do that, I just want to say I run an artist in residence program in elementary schools that's called Whoop and Soccer. And it's a program where kids learn creative expression through writing and improvisation and performance. And we have a set of agreements that we build with the kids that are kind of what you would imagine as quote unquote classroom rules, but they're agreements for participation so that kids understand that when they're working with us, this is how they're agreeing to be part of the community. And our first agreement used to be every idea is a good idea. And that was a really useful entry point for all the reasons that we just described. And then a few years ago, our teaching artists were like, I think we need something a little more pointed that gets to the part that you said, Nora, about how even if that idea itself might not be right, every idea can lead to something else. So now we say every idea is a good idea and every idea can be revised. And so the idea behind that is that kids understand that they should put themselves out there, and every time they put themselves out there, they're doing something positive, even if what happens to that idea is another kid picks it up or an adult works with them and says, "Well, I hear you want to do, farting alien, but what if farting alien, had a mom that allowed him to not murder everybody with his farts every single time he walked into a room." Some way to engage kids in both the practice of putting themselves out there and in understanding that. So what you said very much reminds me of the version of that we work with third and fourth graders on to hopefully prepare them for a life as high schoolers and beyond where they don't feel shut down. Because that's another persistent thing that happens in schooling, even with creative practice, is that kids feel very quickly like their ideas are not good and not
Mhm.
worth sharing. And they become people who think they're not creative. And so they stop doing the thing that you're describing, which is like, okay, this makes no sense and is totally bananas, but, right? And
Yeah.
the self-censor stops that before it even starts.
Yeah, I mean, I
So
think
true.
that's a good skill to have, even not in the creative world, right? Just sort of figuring out how to put yourself out there and not, you know, not feel beaten down when it doesn't work, right? I think that's just like a skill you got to have all the time. And frankly, sometimes I'm probably better at having that skill in the writer's room than I am in life, because that it feels like a safer space sometimes.
But how many times have I just like laughed at myself and been like, okay, bad pitch. Let's move on.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Oh, is that
That
the worst
felt
thing
flat.
you've heard today? All right. It's,
All right. You make fun of yourself and it's fine.
yeah, but it's, I think, yeah, letting kids like express themselves, but also just be open to changing it. And I think also maybe teaching them the confidence, because I think it took me a while to learn this as a writer too, that like the next idea will come, right? Like maybe your one idea wasn't like the idea, but like have the confidence that like if you had the imagination and the excitement about this one idea, the next one will come, or you'll work at it and you'll find something even better, right? So like your darling of a scene that we wrote that we're just like so in love with, that we absolutely can't do, like we will find the better version of it. Or, I mean, maybe it won't be as brilliant as the one we had, but it'll be 95% of brilliant, So you'll like find that thing. And I think that's a lot of what we do is like having the confidence, like, okay, all right, this didn't work, but the next one will. And maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But, just knowing that your brain generated the one thing, like it'll generate more,
And you've had each other to build that like spiral of like, Nora has the idea that doesn't work and Lilla says like, you'll get them next time. Or, you sort of started this by saying that like sometimes you're up, and sometimes you're down, and having a partnership allows one person to be up and one person to be down as a way to keep the ideas generating.
Absolutely. And also just, working in entertainment, working with a bunch of other writers in a room and then working on a set and then working long hours in post, crazy things happen. And I cannot tell you the most valuable thing about having a partner is like being able to look at Nora and be like, that was crazy, right? Like that was totally insane. And she's like, yes, you're so validated right now. Like that in itself is just worth having a partnership, because a lot of unexpected kooky things happen, and just having somebody else that like witnessed it is amazing.
Yeah, I think it's kind of almost like a mental health thing. You're like, am I insane? Yeah, and the answer is like, no, you're not crazy.
No.
Like that is just what happened. So like, thank goodness for that. And I obviously a lot of people we know are solo writers. They're not in a team or whatever. But you hope that you can also, because they don't have a Lilla that they can turn to and go, was that just crazy? Like you can be that for them, right? Like you're a safe space for them to like come to you and be like, am I crazy? And you'd be like, no. Here, come sit on the couch. Well, let's talk about it. Because
have
we
you
do that for each other.
have you explicitly tried to build that with other women in the industry? Is that like a conscious choice that you all have made?
Yeah.
Absolutely. We didn't have in our first few rooms anybody that was a woman in our first room, except for us. Our second room, there wasn't anybody that was interested in being a role model or being a mentor. Nora and I came up writing a lot of genre and science fiction and action. And generally in those rooms, if there were women, it was like one,
Or it was
so
us.
there were also, or it was us, or it was, And so there was also sometimes like this Highlander-ish mentality of there can be only one, right? So you would get in a room and all of a sudden, if there was another woman, they might feel threatened. So as Nora and I have very consciously fought to A, hire more women, B, bring women up. And if there's ever anybody that wants to talk to us about being a television writer, about getting into screenwriting, whatever it is, and they want to have a cup of coffee, the answer is always, yeah, let's do that. Because nobody was there for us when we were looking for it. Thank God we had each other. And as we moved up the ranks, we found other women that we admired, that we befriended, that are still like lifelong friends today. But it wasn't as formal as having a boss or a mentor or anything like that. It was more like you were finding peer-to-peer support systems and people that could give you great advice and people that have been around the block and stuff. We did find those, and we want to be able to be that for other women coming up as well.
Yeah, I think when there wasn't that structure or that tradition as much when we joined the business, I think there is now, much more so in more organizations, and just more conscious effort for people to sort of put a hand down and pull somebody up in that way. But yeah, I think it's gotten much better. We went from a situation where, yeah, we were literally the only women in our very first show and the ones with the least amount of power we were staff writers, which is like the very bottom of the totem pole, but I think probably Prodigal Son, right, Lilla, was the first show we were on where there was actually a majority women staff. And that was like really fun, for us. We were suddenly surrounded by women. We're like, oh, this is really cool. And of course, it's a show about a father and a son and serial killers. So it was, the kind of room you would expect to walk in and see a bunch of men. But it was the creators were men, but it was a very women heavy room.
But I think for like, I remember one point being like, am I crazy? I always ask myself, am I crazy? And I wrote a list. And for the first 7 years of our career, Nora and I worked with 5 other women and something like 40-something men.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That was the ratio. Oh, and the other thing that's important too is like now we're in a position where it's not just hiring people in the writer's room, but like it's very important for us to hire female directors, to hire heads of department that are women, and underrepresented talent that, really deserves their shot too. So it's been a real gift to be able to build out that part of it as well.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about how you learned to become showrunners? I've interviewed Craig Thomas, who was the showrunner of How I Met Your Mother, and he had his mentor who was himself a showrunner. And so they talked about how he was 28 when he started How I Met Your Mother. And so had a more senior person kind of as his explicit mentor, sort of teaching him that. How did you all learn to become showrunners? Did you learn from each other? Did somebody, have you just been like barreling through it?
I think probably barreling through might be the answer, right? I mean, we've had a long career, and we have been fortunate to be in at least a couple shows into our career where we were sent to set, where we were given more responsibility, where all of a sudden we were running the room. I think the show Haven was a big thing for us because it was this show on the Sci-Fi Channel made for 3 cents. We were doing this kind of elaborate, cool genre Stephen King show for like no money in Nova Scotia. So it was really almost like you had no choice but to step up and like kind of learn how to be a producer on set, because there was no other option, right? Like we had to do to get that show made.
And half the time you couldn't even like call anybody because you were out in the woods in the middle of Nova Scotia. Like you can't call back to LA.
Fun fact, Nova Scotia is on a time zone that is past the East Coast, right? So it is its own time zone called the Atlantic time zone. So if your boss is in Los Angeles and your actor's coming up to you with questions about a scene, if you were to call him, you would be waking up at 4 a.m. So you have to figure out the answer, or somebody says it's raining. We cannot do the big ending tonight. Like, how are we going to set it inside? And we're like, oh crap, let's go rewrite that. Like it just had to happen. So that was a big training ground for us, that show in particular. But it was, I think it was watching other showrunners. I think it was watching showrunners for us also sometimes make mistakes or run things in the way that we would never do, like you learn just as much from the good experiences as you do from the bad experiences. And just also having the understanding that you're going to be constantly learning the job because every show is different. Running Poker Face is a very different experience than like running this new Buffy, because, the new Buffy, you're going to dealing with people with vampire makeup. You're dealing with schedules, of like how to shoot things, VFX in a massive way. Whereas, Poker Face, we had Natasha Lyonne as our main character, and every other character except for Benjamin Bratt, who was recurring, was a guest star. We never experienced that. So no matter what show you are running, it's always going to be a learning experience every single time. And Lil and I kind of welcome that. And it's kind of also what keeps it fun and exciting. Like if we had to do the same thing time after time, we'd probably be bored. But it's never boring. It's always a new and weird challenge. Like on Poker Face, all of a sudden we were doing these episodes. We did a rock and roll episode. I'd never had an episode with that much music and the way that the production had to happen, and hiring basically actors who are also a band and like, all of that stuff. It's like, it's a totally new experience, and you just kind of have to open yourself up and also not be afraid to ask questions or hire somebody, who the music supervisor, for example, and say like, how do we do this? How do we accomplish this? Because I've never done it before, and I'm going to be honest with you, so that you can help me make it better.
It's almost every single episode. There's something new that you're just adding then to your like little tool belt of like, all right, well, now I know when you're supposed to hire a choreographer, how many days in advance before you shoot a dance sequence and da-da-da-da-da. And like, do we need, wow, water tank. That's a new one. Had no idea that these were the rules and that this was the safety and that this was the time that it takes. And these are all the doubles we need. Like every single episode, it's constantly just being like, all right, well, put that one in my pocket, made some mistakes there, or that worked out well, whatever it is. But it's just new every time.
But a lot of times there's like somebody on staff that's been like, oh, we did a water episode. Let me tell you what not to do, or I know exactly the guy, that you should call and stuff. And so I think it's being open to all that. But yeah, we didn't necessarily have somebody that was our sort of showrunner mentor, but we certainly worked very closely with a lot of our showrunners, especially as we sort of rose up the ranks. And certainly Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., we were, really close to the production. We were shooting in LA and literally our stages were across the way, so I think we got a ton of real world practical experience on that show that we were able to bring to like Prodigal Son and Poker Face and all that stuff. And so you just have to sort of sometimes fake it till you make it and figure out what's the next step that I'm going to take, and ask for advice, and don't be afraid to sound stupid, because it's better to ask for advice on a set than to pretend like you know what you're talking about when you absolutely do not.
Was it something you aspired to? Was showrunner something that you wanted to do?
I didn't know the job existed when, I was in school. But as soon as I figured it out, I was like, oh, that's the coolest job I've ever heard of. And I was mad. I was like, how come nobody told me about this? I would have gotten started many years earlier. And as soon as I kind of locked into the fact that this thing existed and the idea that you could create your own TV show and run it, oh my God, I'm still obsessed with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think in my mind, I always wanted to be a creator of some kind. If it was, writing my own novels when I was a kid, or creating a television show. Like, I think there's a lot of writers in television that are very content to be on a staff, to be like, oh, I just come to work every week and I help with whatever the thing is that we're doing. And they're less ambitious about selling their own stuff and getting out there. And I totally understand that, because it can be like really soul crushing and crazy to sort of go through that development process. But Lilla and I, it was never an option to not, we were always doing that, I don't even think we discussed it. It was just like, this is what we do. If we're not working on a show, we're trying to figure out what the next thing is that we're going to write.
Okay, last question. Nora, what is your favorite thing that Lilla's ever made? And Lilla, what is your favorite thing that Nora's ever made?
Oh, geez.
Made it only one of us?
Okay, we made it together, but I consider it to be her brainchild.
Yes, or a scene, or a problem, or, a problem solved, or a, idea.
Well, I'll say, I guess in recent years, like the Poker Face episode, Escape from Shit Mountain, would not at all exist without Lilla coming up with the twist, which I don't want to reveal on this podcast, except for to tell people go watch Escape from Shit Mountain on Poker Face season 1, because it's an unconventional episode, and Lilla pitched me this sort of crazy twist, which if you've watched the episode, you kind of know. And I was like, I don't think we're allowed to do that. Like, it was one of those like, oh, that really breaks all the rules. And then it kind of became my job to like, okay, how do I figure out that we can do this? How can we also make it feel like a traditional Poker Face episode while having this really unconventional storytelling? So that was like, it was very like brave of her to pitch it in that moment, of the show too. And Ryan Johnson like flipped out over it and was like, we're going to do it. And he ended up directing the episode, and, we've won awards for it and stuff like that. So it's all due to Lilla coming up with this crazy twist that was like, okay, now how are we going to support that and hang all this other stuff onto it? So that I give credit to Lilla and her night of insomnia, where she figured that out.
That's it. It's true. Everyone's like, you had a dream. And I was like, no, I had insomnia.
The opposite. Very opposite.
I had a wake.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'll tell you a story about when Nora and I were working on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. We had worked basically all in network and a basic cable, like Suits. And Nora kept saying, we need our prestige drama. And I was like, why? Do we really need to write prestige drama? She's like, and I know what we're going to write. I have been reading about wagon trains, and I think that we should write a pilot about a wagon train. Now, what you need to know about us when we were growing up is that our mom is from North Dakota, and our entire childhood, she was like trying to get us to read Willa Cather, and like taking us out to the middle of North Dakota and trying to teach us about pioneer women, and like reading all the Laura Ingalls Wilder. It like became like this running joke that like one year I think Nora got like, those like day of the year 365 like calendars where you would rip off page by page. She got one that was like 365 like famous pioneers, pioneering tales or something.
Stop.
And so when my trusted and beloved sister comes to me and says, I want to write a thriller on a wagon train, I was like, have you been talking to Mom? Absolutely not. We're not going to do this. But slowly but surely, she convinced me, and she put it to me in a way that made me go, okay, now I'm in. Where she's like, what you don't get is like back then, those first wagon trains were like space travel. Like they had no idea where they were going. It was highly dangerous. It was deadly. You're out there with a bunch of people you don't know and trust. Half of them have like criminal backgrounds, and it's going to be like thrilling and insane. And I was like, okay, I'll do it. And that script, while it has never been made, because everyone is too much of a wuss to make it, because it's very exciting, it's very violent, and it's nuts, has gotten us job after job after job after job. At one point, I don't know if you ever saw the movie The Substance, the Demi Moore movie that came out last year. Okay, we had the director of The Substance. Well, she's technically still attached to this project to direct this thing. So it was going to be like Tarantino, but also French, but also American West. And I challenge anybody out there to make this thing. But in the meantime, it has opened so many doors for us. And Nora was absolutely right.
Oh, thanks, Lil.
Thank you.
I cannot wait.
Someday somebody will make this. Yeah. But yeah, Coralie Fargette, before she was like, the nominated for Oscars and stuff, we were obsessed. She has a fantastic movie called Revenge that is basically a Western. And we were like, I think this French woman like gets Westerns. Like we should give her this script. And she had said no to every single overture from like people took meetings with us to be like, how did you get to Coralie? But we're like, she just read this script. So maybe someday
you're like Laura Ingalls Wilder.
We will get it made. I know it was a little bit
the biggest FU to the Laura Ingalls Wilder version of the West. I'll tell you that much.
It's sort of like all that stuff that our mom put in our brains, plus all the stuff that we put in, like all the Stephen King and all the dark, weird stuff that sort of meshed together and became this pilot of ours called Red West. So one day, Lil, maybe.
One day.
Yeah.
And we're back to where we started. Childhood influences and the two of you as partners in crime. Thank you both so much for spending time with me tonight. I really, really enjoyed hearing about your process and about your practice together. And thanks for taking up my nerdy education ideas and thinking them through in the context of your practice. I really appreciate you both.
Thank you. Thank
you so much. This has been a blast.
Doug, that episode, 10 out of 10, no notes. Yeah. What is not to love about two sisters who start their collaboration by buying a secret television that only they watch in their house and ending with show running the first season of Poker Face? Is there anything left to say? It was so great listening to these two people obviously have been, if you want to put air quotes around the word mentoring one another since they were 3 years old, and who so clearly flow state operate as a team. Right. And it's really inspiring to me to listen to them talk about how important it is for them to now get other women particularly, but young people in the room, as they call it, which is a phrase that I've now come to enjoy, get them in the room, and give them the opportunity to grow and make things and be the stars of this collective and this collaborative. I just loved it so much.
Their story is a great story, and it's unfolded perfectly. And it's still going.
That's true. It's true.
I have a question for you, Erica.
You do? I'm so glad to hear that.
Crazy. I was listening to them talk, and it occurred to me, I have siblings. I know you have a brother, Jack. What is something that what are 3 things that you wish you think would be fun, that you wish you could have maybe co-mentored or done together professionally? Since you were 3.
Well, since we were 3. Well, I'm 11 years older than my brother, so I've definitely been bossy with him our whole life. But I will give you 3 things. So first, we have both always loved, but never together, fan fiction writing. So that's one I would put in a mentorship category if I could. So fan fiction writing.
You could still do that. One thing.
It's true. He is now a college professor. So how about college professoring, which we now both do?
Oh, well, you did. That's 2.
And how my kid is a big kid, and he has 2 teeny tiny kids. And though I would not pretend to be an expert, now that I am an auntie to the 2 cutest children on the planet, let's call it parenting mentorship.
3 things. Okay.
I mean,
Awesome.
those were all real things.
Those are not the cutest.
I could have gone.
Mine is.
No. Noah and Josie Frankel are the 2 cutest nieces to ever niece, and no discussion. This will let me know if Jack actually listens to the show, because
Yeah, totally.
I just shouted out his babies on the show. Doug, I have a question for you that I know our listeners are dying to hear about, which is, what are 3 ways that they can get and stay involved with our show?
Well, I mean, you could stand on your head and scream, but I don't know that would work. So maybe instead of that, you could subscribe and follow us wherever you get your podcasts.
1, very important. The more you subscribe, and comment, the more our podcast gets bumped up in feeds. So
It's all very true.
standing on your head, if you want to do that,
I mean, if you have an audience,
go for it.
that's great. Yeah.
And go for it. But for sure, subscribe, comment. That's 1.
I can't stand on my head. I've never been able to. It just doesn't work for me.
No, me either. No, thank you. I have a tiny pea head, so it doesn't really work. Tip over.
Another way that's really novel that we've never talked about before is visiting our website, artseducatorspodcast.com, where you can submit ideas for guests and you can learn about other episodes we put out.
That's 2. Go through the back catalog, y'all. You won't be sorry.
The other one would be, you could also just write us an email. You could comment on our social media feeds, or you could just send us an email at artseducatorspodcast@gmail.com. We're always checking our email.
I hear it's the new snail mail.
Yeah.
We love to get some snail mail. And 3 things. We love to hear from you. Write to us, comment. We are out here and talking all the time about how arts educators save the world. Onward together.
Thanks.
Arts Educators Save the World is hosted by Erica Rosenfeld Halverson and produced and co-hosted by me, Alec Lev. Our executive producer is Doug Matica, and our audio producer is Justin Asher. Special thanks to our collaborators, the brilliant and talented Kate Baldwin, and our great friends at Story Pirate Studios, Lee Overtree, Benjamin Salka, and Amy Fiore. Original music is by Dan Lipton, and our artwork is by Lyra Evans. Check out our website, designed by Cole Locasio, at www.artseducatorspodcast.com. We're on Instagram at artseducatorspodcast, and you can write to us with your questions and comments at contact@artseducatorspodcast.com. You can also find us at a place called YouTube. And wherever you're listening, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review. It really helps the show. We're proud to be sponsored in part by the University of Wisconsin-Madison and the Gibb Faculty Fellowship. Arts Educators Save the World was created by Erica Rosenfeld Halverson and Alec Lev.